Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Veronica, and I'm going to introduce the space to you before introducing the event. Thank you all for coming for this Record Store Day celebration of the book. Yesterday was Record Store Day itself. And here we are today at Recirculation. Recirculation is a project of Word Up Community Bookshop. Word Up, has anyone here been to Word Up before? Oh, okay, a few of you. So Word Up is located a few blocks up at 165 and Amsterdam Avenue. And it's a collectively run bookstore and art space. And it's been around for about 11 years. For the first 6 years, we were completely volunteer run. And our aim was to really just, besides making books available and art and educational workshops, whatever the community needed, we wanted to be able to facilitate. One of our really regular volunteers of Word Up for 4 years strong was Tom Burgess. Tom passed away from COVID in 2020. And before he went into the hospital, when he went into the hospital, he'd given us a call and let us know where everything was, just in case he came out incapacitated. And so a lot of his books and records, then after he passed, in his one-bedroom apartment in Inwood and his 4 storage units in Upper Manhattan. A few of us here were some of the crew that helped move out his stuff, and it all came and gathered here so that those books could be recirculated throughout the community. He was also an avid music fan and had a ton of records. And a lot of those records had been, music he loved, but also things that he collected just in case, he was going to do something with them later, in case he would resell them in the future. A lot of those books, a lot of the records, just in case, especially, were from Record Store Day, which was a day that he really enjoyed and that he made the rounds of for many years through all the different record stores in New York City. So sometime last spring, when Will and I were opening up this space and trying to make the books and records available in the neighborhood, was when Larry walked in and came upon this treasure trove of Record Store Day finds of years past, multiple copies of lots of pressings. And what we didn't know at the time, Will and I, was that Larry was working on a book about Record Store Day. So it does feel really full circle that this is happening here. Thanks for bringing us this event. And I'd say whatever you can do to come back would be awesome. To come back to recirculation, help the recirculation happen, either here or also at Word Up, which is at 2113. Amsterdam Avenue. Also, I need to mention too that we're a nonprofit organization. So with the programs that we do, that's where the money's going. A lot of the stuff here is pay what you can, and you can help in those ways that way as well. So without further ado, I will introduce those speaking in the actual event. First, Larry. Larry Jaffee is the author of Record Store Day, the most improbable comeback of the 21st century. He's a New York-based journalist whose writing has appeared in the New York Times, Rolling Stone, Billboard, and numerous other publications. Music has been Jaffee's passion since being a teenager in the 1970s, meaning 3 Sex Pistols, but only 2 Beatles. Some of his writing can be found at rocksbackpages.com, also his website, larryjaffee.com. And he co-founded in 2017 a site called makingvinyl.com, and it's a conference devoted to the global rebirth of record manufacturing. When not listening to music on vinyl or crate digging, Jaffee teaches writing and journalism at local colleges. He will be joined in conversation with Word Up Collective member and Recirculation co-founder Will Glass, who's a musician and a 19-year resident of Washington Heights. He works as the program director of the Jazz Foundation of America. His adventures in vinyl include a stint selling records for Fat Beats Distribution, producing the 2-volume Glass Breaks drum library, production tool series, playing drums on the Dirty Projector side of a 2006 split 10-inch, and moving all of Tom's records. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Veronica. How's everybody doing? Thanks for coming out. Larry, if we could. Oh, you're going to start the passage. Yes.
Oh, okay. So this is the title of chapter 1. The report of my death was an exaggeration, which is actually something that George Bernard Shaw said, is, well known in literary circles. So I'm going to read this quote from Gerhard Bloom, who's from Sony Music Entertainment. I saw it dying. I saw it dead. I saw it coming out of the grave, rising from the ashes. What he was talking about was the final. You wanted?
Yeah. I wanted to start at the beginning with you. It's the year 19-something. Young Larry Jaffee has just stepped out of a record store with the first record he's purchased of his own volition. What record store was it, and what record were you on?
Well, it wasn't actually a record store. It was a department store, and they had what's known as cutout bins for 99 cents. And the record I bought was Introducing the Beatles.
Nice.
And I took it home. I loved it immediately. I saw her standing there. It was the first track. I loved the whole record from beginning to end. Boys, I remember the Wrinkle Star song. I remember Love Me Do, the harmonica. I still have that record, by the way. And the next day, I said to myself, how old was I? About 13, 14. I went back the next day and bought Hot Rocks by the Rolling Stones, which had just come out.
So both sides. Right?
Yeah. And then I went back to the Beatles after that. I'm not going to give you all my record purchases, but I went back and I bought the White Album. I think was the next Beatles record. No. What happened was I bought the blue and red, the red and blue greatest hits Beatles, and then the next day I got the White Album. But I'll stop there.
Nice. That's cool that a department store was your first one. Some people may not know that records started because the machines were made first, right? And they were sold at furniture stores. So the original records were sold at furniture stores as a way to sell the machines. They were tools to sell them, right?
Actually, it's funny that you bring that up because I was listening to a podcast the other day that a friend of mine who's an academic in England, her specialty is writing about gender and vinyl and how she traced it back to the 50s, her research, and how it was a furniture purchase. And usually the husbands really didn't want to have anything to do with it. It was more the aesthetics of the wood and how it fit in the room.
Yeah, these big things that are like the size of a trunk, right, with the record player on top.
But that was like the end of the women's, like they weren't supposed to pick out the music or anything like that. It was very sexist.
Yeah. So what was your favorite record store growing up once you?
Well, there was this one store, I can't remember the name of it, but it was in East Northport. And they had this amazing $2 bin. And I bought their Funhouse by the Stooges. And for $2. That I don't have anymore. I'll get into what happened to some of those records. But that record sort of changed my life. And I remember having with the clerk there a conversation. The Rolling Stones' Black and Blue had just come out, and Fool to Cry was like the hit single. And at the time, I was more of a Queen fan. I said, I'm a little disappointed in the Stones record. But record stores are really the place. Back then I realized you learn about music, you learn about life, you meet friends, maybe, girlfriends, boyfriends, future spouses.
Yeah. Do you remember your first CD purchase?
Yeah, I do. It was totally by accident. It was in November 1985. I was home from graduate school at Penn State. The new Tower Records at 4th Street and Broadway just opened up. And Biograph had just come out. I'm a huge Bob Dylan fan.
The book, right?
No, this was The record.
The bootleg series volume.
No, it was before they even started that.
Okay.
It was just called Biograph, and it was
right.
5 LPs. I get it home, I open it up, and there are 3 CDs in it.
Oh, you thought
they missed. There was bad quality control. And the funny thing is, like 15 years later, I wrote about that extensively for a magazine I edited about that business of packaging and CD production and things like that. So that was a mess up by Sony. But so I said to myself, I was on a budget, and I was like, I planned on getting a CD player, but it wasn't, quite ready yet. So, I saved up my money, and I finally got a $300 CD player or something like that a few months later.
It's funny you say bad quality control. I feel like that could be applied to CDs in general. You touch on this in the book, a lot of what sets the stage for vinyl, first to die and then come back. But, of course, the CD's taking over. But for music fans, the industry was kind of barreling into this new format and going hard at selling it. And it's convenient because you can skip songs, it's smaller, all these things. But the audio quality early on was quite poor, and they weren't sampling at the high enough rate, really. The example for me was a lot of people my generation had Parliament's greatest hits. They learned about them through Dr. Dre and the samples and stuff. So a lot of kids my age when we were 14, 15 had Parliament's greatest hits, which is late 80s compilation on a CD from a major label. And years later, when I heard it on vinyl for the first time, even a beat up vinyl copy of Funkadelic versus the Placebo Syndrome, it sounded so different. Like I could hear much more on the tambourines. There's so much vocal harmony in that band that was kind of lost on the CD I'd grown up with. And I was like, wow. And you realize that the product that the industry had been pushing, like everyone replaced your records by CDs, like they were of a lesser quality.
Yeah, actually, it reminds me of a conversation, an interview I did with Lou Reed. He was talking about his own catalog, and he was like reviewing some of these CDs and was saying, "There's no bass.
Yeah,
where's the bass?"
The remastering is just, they kind of threw it on.
I think it really in the beginning it depended on what effort they put into mastering, especially if they were using vinyl mixes and mastering. It's not. They had to figure out the digital, perfect the digital side of it. Now there were great CDs in the early days. I mean, one thing CDs allowed me to do was get into other genres. So I was a rock and roll kid. I mean, that's all pretty much I listened to. And then when I was in my 20s and 30s, I said to myself, there's a big world out there. So one of the first CDs I bought was Leonard Bernstein, Rhapsody in Blue. And it was on Deutsche Grammophon, I think was the label, and I still have that. It sounds fantastic.
Yeah. So vinyl takes over, or CD takes over rather. I have a visual aid from this amazing collection that's all around us. There's just a few things that I've come across since we planned this event. This is a small independent music magazine called Sound Views, Subterranean Music and Politics, July 1991. Vinyl, rest in peace. This is like early 90s. I remember Urge Overkill song, Kids Are Insane. There's a line like, "Don't take my vinyl away." So like, what was happening at that time? New vinyl had pretty much stopped by then, or was really winding down rapidly, right?
Well, that first page that I just read from, I would just read the first sentence. The Billboard headline on May 11th, 1991. I mean, it's funny how it syncs up exactly. Screams somewhat ominously. The LP's passage to oblivion, announcing that the distribution companies owned by the major labels, Warner Electric, Atlantic, and Sony Music, were no longer accepting returns from retailers on vinyl albums. Universal wasn't either. 20 years later, 6 major record conglomerates were folded into 3, Universal, Sony, and Warner. Wrote the CD as the cash cow music format for a decade, as the cash cow music format of choice. the internet as a means of electronic distribution still was a decade away from being a commercial option, playing catch up from Napster's illicit wake up call. So the interesting thing what happened, the CD, the industry had to reinvent itself. And in the 80s, kids weren't listening to music. They might be watching on MTV, which caught on, it was invented, it launched like 1981, 82, around that period. But video games was the main pastime for young people. So the industry realized they needed to reinvent themselves. And Sony and Philips in Europe, basically, they were doing R&D for a while on this like little disc. And then they made peace and came out with a unified format. I think it's really interesting that the 80s especially, well, so getting back to that billboard, the industry wanted to make sure that the CD would be accepted. So they told the retailers, we'll accept returns on this product. But on the other hand, you can't return LPs anymore if they don't get sold. So then the retailers shifted over. From the book business, right?
Yeah.
I also think it's interesting during the 80s that everyone still called it going to the record store, even though all they sold were CDs pretty much. Once they got rid of the LPs. There was a middle period, the last part of the 80s, that cassette was the most popular format.
My first purchase was 1985 at Tape World, Eastland Mall, East Detroit, and that was a whole change. It was just tapes. I don't remember if they had CDs or not, but it was. I don't remember. I was 5. I got it was the Grateful Dead Touch of Grey single, which was a big single at the time. It came with a poster, which I realized later was like what would have been with the 7-inch. So I had both the tape and then this poster to hang on my wall. I didn't become a Deadhead, but I still have that tape too. It's exciting. So as like consumer electronics advances, suddenly everyone has a CD burner. Everyone realizes these things we've been paying $18.95 for at stores are like tiny pieces of plastic that are worth less than $1, and you just drag and drop the files, and in a very short period of time, the CD has been kind of devalued between burning and then very quickly by Napster streaming, right?
So I started a new job in the beginning of 1998 when CD was still at its peak, but within 2 years, we would say, well, what's the best-selling CD of the year? And it would be the blank CD because everybody was burning.
Yeah.
So, you're absolutely right. And the RIAA, what was interesting also about what was going on, they spent all these negotiations on DAT. They thought DAT was the future, which was at best a professional audio medium.
Digital audio tape, yeah.
Right.
They're like the size of a cassette, and they use them in production.
So
still.
they were like making sure that every blank DAT, they would get royalties. So, and they totally took their eye off of the, ball in terms of PCs having drives built in. I guess Apple was like one of the first computer companies that did that, a burning option.
Yeah, I've definitely talked to plenty of people who felt like they'd been gouged with the CDs for so long, and that when they had the opportunity to do music totally for free, it went hard. So that's like pretending the collapse of retail music. So what was the lowest year for vinyl sales?
Probably 2005. Yeah, the interesting thing, the research I did, it sort of inched up a little bit. No, I would say it's 2006 was the lowest. Weird thing is in 2007 it just went up a little bit, but it was a blip on the radar screen.
Yeah.
It was like 0.1%. It was not even 0.01%. I get into the book, the problem with the numbers that are given to the media are estimates, and they project out because the retailers generally don't report. It's a small percentage of even like the record store day retailers. They report the record store day, but they won't report to like the RIAA
Okay.
or
Sounds scandalous.
yeah. So I don't know how they could ever really overcome that. Now I know that these numbers are wrong because Making Vinyl, which I co-founded, talks regularly to all the big distribution companies and manufacturers. So in 2018, we had a conference and I read the half-year report and it said 9 million units were pressed in the first 6 months of 2018. And people from the audience yelling, that's way low. And then afterwards, a friend of mine named Steve Sheldon, who owned Rainbow Records in Santa Monica, California, he said, I pressed 6 million on my own. You know, and there are companies bigger than his at the time.
Yeah.
So it made no sense.
Yeah.
You know, and now one of the things that we heard about this rebirth is that retail stores, and I mean record stores, not Target or, you know, real record stores, they're very careful on what they order. And that 85% on record store day pretty much is sold in that first day.
Yeah.
You know, and then they might get stuck with maybe 15%, but they keep it over time it will sell.
Yeah.
It takes a little while.
Yeah. So the first record store day is 2007.
No, 2008.
And it's the same year. Am I remembering it's the same year that Tower Records closes?
Right. No, so what happened was in 2006, Tower was bankrupt, Chapter 11, that they were reorganizing and try to get out of it.
One of many chains, like others, like
Right.
HMV, that would close in a short period of time.
Right, and Virgin also was here for, I mean, there were these like superstores, there were 3 major superstores. 2 of them had like 2 stores in the city. I mean, it was a great time for me,
Yeah.
you know, because I could hang out at these places and spending ridiculous amounts of money. but they all disappeared. So in 2007, there were 3 independent record store coalitions that were friendly rivals. And what they would, you know, occasionally...
Independent stores.
Independent stores. Yeah, these were not the chain stores. But they all were very cognizant of what are the ramifications of Tower. You know, it could mean one of 2 things. One, you know, we have to find something else to do, you know, because people aren't interested in physical media anymore. Or it could be an opportunity, you know, that, because I remember in a Billboard article during my research, it was saying something like, you know, 75% of all sales at Tower stores. So who's going to sell all that product, you know? And that's one of the reasons why the CD did decline tremendously, you know, since the 2000s.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first record store day, how many? So these are record store days formed around the idea of both celebrating the record store and like really kicking up a notch with the production of new vinyl. That was like from the beginning part of the idea.
Well, so in July 2007, Michael Kurtz headed one of these coalitions called Music Monitor, and the store manager up in Maine said to him, you know, we need to like create some sort of holiday to get people excited about going to record stores. And then like a week later, a guy named Eric Levin in Atlanta, who headed a different coalition, said, yeah, we should, you know, I sell comic books, and they have something called Comic Book Day. And Chris Brown from Bull Moose up in Maine was also selling comic books. And he said, you know, we should do something like Comic Book Day. So, but Eric took it one step further. He said, you know, by the way, my used record bin disappears as soon as I get a collection in. People are buying this stuff. Maybe we should try to get new vinyl made.
People were sensing that vinyl was coming back, like there's more interest in the format.
Right.
But at this time, because the record companies had backed off producing it, the CD had taken over, so no one was making much new vinyl. Largely, I mean, a lot of like indie bands, there's certain like hardcore bands and indie hip hop, like little pockets, people would be making their own records, runs of 300 or 500 or something. But as far as like the industry making new vinyl was pretty much unheard of at that point, right?
That's true. in the book, I talk about some of the independent labels like Sub Pop and Epitaph that were pressing 45s to take on the road and things like that. But in July 2007, I was telling you about that exchange of emails. They were planning on a big event in Baltimore in September, where they said, "All right, we'll get the people together to figure out where we should go with these ideas." But the problem is they waited until the Saturday morning. They've been partying all week in Baltimore because one of the record store owners had a nightclub, and they would bring major artists actually to perform, and do meet and greets and things like that for the store owners. Then get all the swag and they bring back to the. But people are checking out of the hotel or hungover, and one of the people who was still there, she says they were waiting in the lobby of the hotel for some other people for breakfast, and this guy dumped this stack of newspapers, and the headline on the front page was Tower Records liquidated. That was the last store open, and that was it.
Wow. So that was the headline the day that the idea of Record Store Day was created.
Right. So now the funny thing is they only had like about 10 people at this meeting. There was a convention of a few hundred, and then all of a sudden left like 10 people. So they started talking about the concept. And me tracing this back 15 years was kind of fun. It was sort of, there's a great movie called 24-Hour Party People. And it's about how what's the label? The New Order, Joy Division, their label.
Yeah.
Factory, right. So the founder of Factory Records was in attendance of the Sex Pistols' first concert, and in the audience were all these future band leaders. So that's how I vision it. To get everybody in a Zoom call, because I was writing this book in the middle of the pandemic, so I know I couldn't do it in person, and we're scattered all over the country. And so I was talked out of that was too ambitious to try to get all those people together on a Zoom call. So I had to do it piecemeal.
Yeah, well, it comes together in the book too. It's exciting, everyone's different perspectives. I mean, no one seemed to know at that time how big a deal Record Store Day would become. No one was like, Eureka, this is going to save us all. It was sort of like, why don't we try this with vinyl? And then they got it together in a year, right?
Less than that.
Yeah.
So they greenlit it in September with those 10 people. It was sort of like Woodstock. People claimed that they were at the meeting, but then it turned out they weren't. And then, even at the same company, the two Record Store Day full-time employees said, you need to talk to Amy Dorfman from Newberry. She was at the meeting. So I contact Amy, and she says, I wasn't at the meeting. I left the day before, but my colleague, Larry Mansdorf, was there. And so I interviewed both of them together.
Yeah.
It was funny. And he said, yeah, I was there.
Yeah. It's great. And the first Record Store Day, there's a really exciting passage in the book about, obviously this idea, there's a lot of excitement, and the first band, or the major band of that year, to become like the Record Store Day ambassador and to do a very special in-store as Metallica. And Lars Ulrich is one of many Record Store Day ambassadors and musicians who were interviewed, famous musicians who grew up working in record stores and were clerks and had that in their past and what got them excited about music. So then a lot of people are excited to give back. So Metallica, who were one of the biggest bands in the world at that year, they do an in-store, Rasputin? Is that
Rasputin?
Bay Area chain.
Yeah. So
a lot of the key things, but it's Bull Moose, Rasputin, these are smaller independent chains where they're ready to embrace new ideas, kind of, right?
Right. And one of the things that the Record Store Day organizers pointed out was that the musicians were basically telling their labels, we like vinyl. We want you to start getting into it. We want to bring that on the road. We know our fans will be into it.
Yeah.
So it was not just because the stores wanted it as well.
Yeah. So the first year is 1 million or so sales, Record Store Day units? They're hard to
Well,
track.
they only had, what was interesting, there was less than a dozen individual releases.
Yeah.
Most of them were singles, in fact, but they all sold out.
Yeah.
And there were only about 120 participating stores at that time.
Right. Well, I guess I'm
Yeah.
thinking of overall vinyl
So-
sales that year.
Yeah, it
Because
was
you
like
have
a
a
million,
chart in
about a
here.
million units.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, now they're talking, well, see, again, you can't really trust what they say, like 30 million. I think it was like the number that RIAA said, but that's ridiculous because I don't even think they say 30 million. I think they say like half that. We know that the global capacity for record is like 170 million. So that's why when everyone was saying, oh, Adele screwed up the pressing this year because she wanted 1 million units,
Yeah.
that made no sense. It was just still even a blip on the screen, like 1 million versus 170 million.
Yeah. There's a sense
Bred
from
the industry.
Yeah, there's a sense from longtime independent producers that now that the majors are going hard in vinyl, they're taking up all the space at the pressing plants, so people can't get to them. But you're saying that's not necessarily.
Right, and actually, I'm borrowing that from an executive of Warner Brothers named Billy Fields. He was the one that pointed out those numbers don't really add up. It might have affected Sony's own artists getting things made because all the labels have contracts with various pressing plants, and the pressing plant will press whatever they tell them to. And it's an interesting thing about how the industry has changed. So in the 70s, especially like in Los Angeles, there were like 15 pressing plants alone, just in Los Angeles. Now some of these companies were kind of unscrupulous and they would press anything.
Right.
You come in with
rampant.
counterfeits and bootlegs. You come in with cash and they'll do it. Today it's a lot different because they're all working 24/7 and they're backed up. They're booked for 10 months.
Yeah.
They're not going to take a chance and produce illegal stuff. The illegal stuff more likely is going to come from overseas.
Yeah, I always remembered. It must have been around the time of the first record survey, right before that, when I always frequented record stores. I was always into used record stores, where you started to see more new vinyl. Certainly started to see bands who were on the road. Like it was that moment before record store day starts. Like it's kind of feeling like it's coming back. And someone was telling me, I don't remember if it was a musician or someone at a record store, just that it's cool, vinyl's coming back, but the machinery to make records at plants, like no one's ever going to make new machinery again. They're just running on what they have. It'll never come back. But now there's a new Third Man plant. And I also wanted to ask you about the Making Vinyl conference you started, which brings together people who are actually making new vinyl. So what year did you found that?
So that was in 2017. And well, I just wanted to get back to what you were saying about the machinery. So in 2016, I was at a music conference and I was talking to someone who really understood what was going on in the vinyl world. I was, just like a sponge, learning as much as I could. So he said there are 3 manufacturers of new equipment that are selling. So then the next year was when we decided to do the conference. I actually pitched my co-founder in 2013. A friend of mine had sent me a magazine. And honestly, I didn't even know a couple of things. I had blind design. So I edited a CD, DVD production magazine from 98 to 2006. That went out of business. There was a magazine publishing, sale, and we weren't part of the sale, and they killed it. So I was kind of depressed about that because I devoted part of my career to that. And so I decided I was going to get rid of my stuff. George Carlin used to have a thing about, people collecting stuff. I was the epitome, as it was Tom Burgess. Look at this, but so. But I was I was in a relationship with a woman who was into Feng Shui, and she was saying, "Oh, you should just digitize all your CDs." And I found out about this place called iPodtopia, that you could trade in CDs and they would give you an iPad and stuff. So I did that, But so I sold my vinyl collection during that period. I had 2 boxes, do not touch. One of those boxes disappeared with some of the Beatle records I mentioned and my Roxy Music records, I mean, not all of them. I still have Country Life, thankfully. So I realized within 2 years I made a colossal mistake. And then it's funny how, so I moved, both of my parents were very sick and I had to really oversee their healthcare. So I moved back to Long Island and I was still trying to get rid of stuff. I had a box of CDs that didn't sell the first time around. And I had magazines and other music memorabilia. And I realized that, do I really need this stuff? So I found a local store and he's tallying up how much money he's going to give me. And I'm looking through his dollar bin and there's a burlesque record. And I thought of that movie Diner. There was like a scene with a burlesque jazz combo, something like that. And I was like, this record is going to sound great. I have an idea. And sure enough, it was amazing. I got it home and it was like from 1962 Cameo Parkway. The cover wasn't all that interesting, but I had a feeling that was going to be great. And then I'm listening to this and I'm like, you know what, I'm back. I feel like Al Pacino in Godfather 3.
Yeah.
I wanted to, I realized how much I missed record stores.
Yeah.
And during the CD era, we still called them record stores, even though you didn't say you're going to the CD store,
Yeah.
Yeah.
My 8th grade locker was decorated with, I would cut out the cardboard there was a period where CDs were packaged in these long boxes, so they would fit in the vinyl bin, so they didn't have to change the bins. I'm sure a lot of people remember it, but it made for great decorations for my locker. But then everyone was like, "This is such a waste." Half of them are plastic, and it was like.
Well, actually, I know the marketing guy who came up with the phrase "ban the box."
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was an era. So, how many plants are there making new vinyl now?
So now there's probably about 60 or 70 worldwide. Yeah, about, I would say 35 are in the US. And just last week, we found like 4 or 5 new ones.
Really?
In Nashville, which is really strange. And there's an interesting thing in the book. So Third Man Records owns a plant in Detroit. Their label is based in Nashville. So I interviewed Third Man's president, Ben Blackwell, and I said, since the Detroit plant seems to be going well, what about opening one in Nashville as well? So he said, there's already a plant in Detroit, in Nashville. And he meant United Record Pressing, which is the place where Jack White did like the fastest record ever made. And what's interesting about that is Jack recorded 2 songs. He has like a performance space. There's a recording studio there as well, but recorded 2 songs, had the acetate driven over to United Record Pressing, and within 4 hours came back with the singles for you to purchase. Like, they only made 800. So Ben said, well, there's already this plant. Why would we want to do that? Because it was the biggest plant in the US.
Yeah. They're
like doubling capacity. Meanwhile, there's a company, the biggest manufacturer in the world is called GZ in Czech Republic.
Yeah.
They decided they're opening a plant in Nashville that's going to be the biggest in the world. Then in Minneapolis, there's a new plant that's going to be very sizable. There's another new plant in Nashville that's owned by a woman, Piper Payne, who had spoke at our last conference in Los Angeles in 2019. And at that point, she was talking about her plans. So then she and I connected a few weeks ago, and she said, "Yeah, we're already making records."
Wow. But meantime, so Rainbow closed though.
So Rainbow closed not because of the market. It was more about the high cost of doing business in California, energy costs especially.
Okay. Yeah.
What's interesting, all of these factories have a problem attracting labor. Because it's a somewhat dangerous. I think the book is here. In fact, Seymour Stein's a friend of mine from Sire Records, and he tells a story about how he worked at King Records, James Brown's label.
Yeah.
And
Cleveland.
so he was basically supposed to apprentice in every single department, and he was like in this plating department, and he was afraid he was going to burn his hands off. And he pleaded, please don't let me go work there anymore. I'll do anything else. But so yeah, I mean, if you're looking for a new field to break into, you might want to think there is a pressing plant in Brooklyn Flowing. Yeah. And there used to be a great one called Europa Disc, but they left like in early 2000s.
Yeah.
They went to Queens, but they didn't stay there very long. And the interesting thing is, to make a record, you need what's known as a lathe, which cuts the lacquer turns into an acetate. Once it's getting recorded, the music's getting recorded. Those lathes, nobody's making new lathes. And also getting back to Rainbow Closing, the beginning of 2020, there were only 2 suppliers of lacquers, the blank, lacquers.
Yeah, they're
so
metal
one was in
discs
California. Yeah, one was in California. The other one's in Japan. There was a fire that put them out of business. So there's only one supplier worldwide. And then meanwhile, the number of records being produced last year, it set another record. So, I mean, another record since, getting back to what we were saying, since like 2006.
Yeah, it's interesting. Cool. Well, I'll just ask another question or two, and then if anyone else has questions. I did just want to mention you do a great job in the book, just making note of some of the critiques of Record Store Day, like we already talked about, the issues with quantities now that the major labels are in, and early on they would make, a store would order 50 copies of whatever special Record Store Day title, and then they would get 2, and they've been trying to work on that. And that's one kind of controversy in some, there's a lot of different independent stores who specialize in different ways, and people have different opinions. But you also mentioned, kind of the diversity issue with Record Store Day. I mean, we're 2 white dudes talking about this phenomenon. It's very heavy on white rock, as a lot of stuff in kind of industry, especially was 80s and 90s. And there's not so many people of color who are record owners, but you do highlight one in Ohio. Is that in Cleveland?
Yeah.
She's a club DJ. Yeah, that seems really cool. And Record Store Day itself has brought in Run the Jewels as ambassadors one year, and Chuck D has a nice passage in the book, which, to me, it's like, I gotta mention hip hop was founded a 1.5 miles from here, and it was born of records, right? It's like the 2 records put together, and that's given us this genre, which is like doing so much in the world. And percentage-wise, the Record Store Day titles, there aren't a lot, relatively speaking. It's still heavy on the kind of the rock. But then I got my email from Cinder Block people, our local store on 141st. If you haven't been there, check it out. It's a modest store that's in size. It's great, but their list is a lot of the jazz and hip hop titles, and for a small store, they can represent a diverse range of genres just from what they're ordering. But you do address that too, and that's really nice. There's another controversy that I want to bring my own personal experience into. This collection we have here of Tom Burgess's, I got to know a lot of Record Store Day titles. I would listen to things here and there. One of which was Captain Beefheart and the Magic Band, around 71 or so, a sealed copy on yellow vinyl, like impressive. The blurb on the back was from someone like John Peel saying, this is a special era of the Magic Band. He made passing reference to the sound quality being bad. So I was like, okay, it's weird. Maybe it's like not the best sound quality. The price tag on it was $40 at the store when Tom had bought this. I put it on and like almost can't hear music. Like the sound quality, it was like a Walkman inside a gym bag on the other side of the gym, inaudible. Like for most of the record, you could kind of hear what song they were playing, but there's no detail or anything. So then I looked online and people are like, this is the worst Record Store Day release of all time, or like, what were they thinking? So has that been an issue too? Like grappling too much to have, like obscure stuff that is also not.
I think it's the exception. I don't think, if it's for Record Store Day, I think the sound quality is usually better. I mean, there's some really great audiophile. So I bought 13 records yesterday at 3 different stores, and I listened to 3 of them this morning, and all 3 were fantastic.
Yeah.
But I did buy a couple of years ago. It wasn't a Record Store Day release, but a Screaming Jay Hawkins record that was badly mastered and it sounded horrible. I almost took it back, but it was, I mean, it would create problems for the retailer, so it's like, just keep it as an example of what they should not do.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, and then just to touch on your impressions coming here, it's the pandemic, late December. You see all these records. You see record store day titles. Like, are there any favorites? And the Donny Hathaway record, I want special attention on.
So, I want to just back up. So I'm walking up Riverside. I live a block and a half away, and I see these bookcases, and I'm like, "There's going to be a bookstore here? That's amazing!" But even before that, Veronica mentioned before about Word Up. So I went to the post office on 165th Street, and I walked around the neighborhood a little bit, and then I found the store, and I was like, you weren't open at that point, because I moved here in June 2020.
Okay, yeah.
So
during closure,
yeah, everything was pretty much shut down at that point. So I had, this bookcase right over here, they looked like it was I couldn't tell if it was a book or a record. It looked like a 45 or something. I got really excited. I was like, maybe these are singles or something. So then when you opened that was like the first thing I looked at. And it was a Spanish language book. I think it was poetry or something like that. You remember it looked like a record? Yeah. It's all right. So then I ventured back over here and I see the records, boxes and boxes and boxes of records. And I felt like it was a treasure trove. I mean, this is like crate diggers. When I was living on Long Island, I would go to thrift stores all the time. Only once did I ever get something like an REM record, that was worth, like was sealed and from Tower Records from, paid $2 for it or something. Mm-hmm. But that was like rare. Yeah. That like most of the time, there was, the same Engelbert Humperdinck.
Right. Yeah. Same. We had that here too.
So when I realized what happened, I mean, what was also interesting, there were these J&R bags that were never opened. And so I flagged you down and I said, what's the story here? So you told me, well, there was this collector named Tom. And what was interesting to me was, and then you said he was a professor, and I said, where did he teach? And he said, BMCC. And I was like, I just taught there in the fall of 2019. Yeah. So it turned out that we had a mutual friend, and so I started digging a little bit, and because originally my plan was to maybe do a radio. I wanted to branch out into a different medium, and I was, targeting NPR or some, one of the programs there to This American Life or something like that, and then I got very sick, actually. So I mean, I came 4 weeks in a row. I spent at least $500 in those first 4 weeks. Yeah. Right. And I remember that very first time I had the Beatles Anthology 3. I had Garbage, which I really, really wanted, sealed, and the Donny Hathaway. And then, I had a couple of like lesser, records. But it was not more than a couple actually. And I had like $120 and I said, here, will you take a look? And then I asked, would you please save this one for me? Yeah. One of those I had, it was, what's her name? Current artist. I
don't remember.
Oh, okay, it'll come. But it was we both knew it was like worth something.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, so Tom Burgess, whose collection started this space, and the name of this space, Recirculation, Tom, people would be throwing out books and he'd be like, well, wait a minute, these books can find a home. And it's books that, would maybe be in a dollar bin somewhere or torn covers, or you think they wouldn't be of interest. Like he wanted to save them so they could find homes, and that you could connect items with, that there's someone out there who can use this. So like, let's not throw anything out. And it was like a spirit of recycling, but also just like, things should have a home. And if you work hard enough, you can connect them in a meaningful way, and it extended to all kinds of things. I mean, we would laugh about it in the Word Up Collective because Tom would be like, here, I brought you this clothes drying rack. And you never having discussed clothes drying racks before, he'd have really random items, and it was just kind of hyper recycling and be like, oh, this is kind of useful. So you get stuff. And it was interesting to me realizing that, almost everything in his apartment where we cleared a lot of the stuff from is like very used stuff, just like old books, like sometimes bags of clothes, sometimes furniture. It's been worn, it's been salvaged, but like the record store day records are all brand new, they're sealed, they're shiny. It seemed like contrary to, this impulse to recycle, like we don't need new stuff, even if some of the record store day titles were like old records, it's like a Birds LP that's been reissued. And it was kind of hard to square at first, but then it's like you realize, well, Tom just loved record stores, and having it be a holiday is fun, and also just, the fun of collecting and everything else, like, really got him fired up. And so
Well, I remember after I came here, I called Bob George from the Ark, and I said, you know about this guy, Tom Burgess? And he goes, oh, of course, he was up on about benefactors. I felt Tom was a kindred spirit, and I felt really bad that we never were able to meet. And the really interesting thing is, like, he made these little notes about every record, about what tracks were the most interesting, like who wrote what songs, these little asterisks and all that stuff.
Yeah, he would know, like, why something was of interest.
Yeah, I'm sure there's still a lot of records that are here. Notes are in.
Yeah, you'll see TV. Cool. Well, I thought maybe if we could open it up, if anyone has questions for Larry about making vinyl, record store day, anything else?
Yeah.
I'm interested in how the lacquer plant fire is sort of affecting the ripples that are being felt throughout the rest of the set. There's some independent musicians that I have podcasts that I listen to, sort of very much sounding alarm maybe 9 months ago. They were like, this is gonna just totally bottleneck, and then also, but they were clearly compounding that with the I know incorrect Adele thing, like, because they were very small, they're like very small, like hip hop, like that do a lot of like independent vinyl, and were like sort of bitching about the Adele thing, but also the fact there are no lacquers. And they're like, we're gonna lose this new revenue stream we found because of those two aspects. So what is the actual effect of the lacquer?
Okay, so the effect is they don't get to do test pressings like they did before. So getting back to your question about quality, basically it's like the first shot you get to, which is, that's not good. Now, that's not to say that this slew of bad records being made, because usually the cutting engineers they know their job.
And they're sometimes at the plant, but they can also be independent too, right? Like
that's right. Yeah, you're more often they're associated with mastering facilities, but sometimes they're totally independent, like work out of the house.
So because of the shortage of lacquers, you can't, like, it used to be that you could get like 10 test pressings and people would kind of do like limited edition, sell the test pressing. So a lot of that has had to be reined in because they're so scarce.
Sometimes artists like change the order of their tracks. Like they want a different one, so they have to cut a new pressing.
Yeah.
A new acetate.
Yeah.
It's stuff like that probably, especially if you have to wait 10 months for getting it made, like you give up, like it's a give and take, like they compromise on certain things. But the Japanese company, I don't know how they did it. That's probably an amazing story to be told. What they, how they changed the way they did business and how they increased capacity.
That's one of the lacquer makers?
It's the only lacquer.
Oh, that's the only one.
Yeah.
And where was the fire?
In California.
Oh, okay.
Apollo Masters. Yeah. I did an article for BMI actually, right at the height of that period, like when the pandemic just started. And how's the industry going to handle it? There was also it's something I forgot to mention about CDs. So what the CD era did was people became used to paying twice as much for what they already owned, like in terms of music. So those first CDs cost like $18 or something like that, whereas a record cost like $7 or something like that. And now for vinyl, we're paying twice as much for what we would pay the CD for. $30 we don't blink now. It's interesting. Jack White called his tour the supply chain issues tour. And I saw Jack Thursday night. I gave him a copy of the book, and he really loved it, and he's in the book. And he thanked me for like making vinyls. Me, you're the original pioneer of like calling attention to this. Your turntable is not dead is his motto.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. Any other questions?
I guarantee, Jackie, don't worry
I
about
can't
it.
remember your second controversy question. The first was the diversity question about hip hop born just a few blocks from here. What was the second one again?
Well, I brought up the thing about the sound quality, maybe sometimes the issue, but also the pressing quantities, which comes
So
up too.
I want to ask a third question that is hopefully controversial, possibly not, in terms of this being a speculative bubble or a hype or a market distortion. And I don't want to emphasize too much how I want to go about it, except to say that this did not happen overnight. This was a lot of committed activists. And I don't know the difference between the activists that were just like vinyl lovers and the activists who recognized that the unsustainability of the music economy meant that what we have created now are kind of lost leaders for bookstores. That the foot traffic that is brought into bookstores when you're buying, digging through the crates of vinyl, is part and parcel of an underground movement that needs to sustain culture. I didn't ask the question really well, but I'd love to hear more about the movement as a civil rights movement. If that's controversial, fantastic.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that just there's always been a strong underground that's helped to keep vinyl alive, and there's just a lot of fans. I mean, you mentioned Sub Pop, who had a single series fan club that kept going through all those years that was famous for keeping going. But yeah, I mean, punk and hardcore and hip hop certainly, and club DJs and techno. There were some genres where vinyl never went away. It was always a mainstay. Less so than a genre like jazz, where everything got repackaged. Everyone switched to CD, or most people, and then now that's having resurgence.
Well, in the book, actually, Carl Mello from Newberry Comics talks about how only half of the top 100 hip hop records are available on vinyl, so it's not even an opportunity to buy it. And as a result, I have a student currently, he's about to graduate, and he's an aspiring DJ, and he wrote this really great piece about how Kendrick Lamar in a magazine article talked about, if you want to hear my new album properly, get it on vinyl. And it changed everyone's life. I mean, he bought a turntable, he started amassing a record collection. And I think there were more of him. My daughter's 24 years old. I dedicate the book to her, and I say one day she's going to inherit an amazing record collection. As long as she gives her big brother the Black Sabbath records, even if he just puts the covers on the wall, so because he doesn't care. And it's like, I found it was the same percentage of my peers, baby boomers mostly, who care about it. The vinyl industry is not delusional. We don't think we're going to overtake streaming. But to your question about the controversy, musicians are making far more money off of vinyl records than they are streams from Spotify. And I think that was one of the things that Neil Young was talking about recently.
Yeah, I mean, the streaming, I mean, it's not an income stream. It's like, it's just removed that.
Well, Neil actually, Neil's, he brought up Joe Rogan being playing dumb about vaccinations.
Sure. Yeah, but it was already an issue.
But he was also complaining about Spotify not paying musicians properly.
It's interesting you mentioned Kendrick Lamar. I noticed the other day that I think one of the biggest selling hip hop titles on vinyl this past year was Good Kid, Mad City, which came out 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And it just raises the question. I remember I was working at Fat Beats Distribution at that time, and it was popular, but popular in the sense of like a 500 copy pressing was like, then they were gone. Like if it had been pressed more, like if his major label was more on top of it, like it might have been a bigger seller all along. It's so maybe it's clear in the book that younger people are embracing vinyl too, right?
Right.
Which maybe I'll just seg to. I think I have one more question. If anyone else does, we can go back. But just that the sales have been going up. The pandemic obviously crushed everything, and canceled one record store day, and then they had to rethink things. It was too dangerous to have these big lines. So they did this 3-segment record store day drop last year. And it was the most successful record store day yet, right?
Well, when you add up the 3 drops, it exceeded the previous year, 2019, when there was no pandemic. What it forced retailers to do was learn how to do e-commerce. And they hired 20-year-old kids to create websites and, shopping carts and, digitize all the covers. And so it took them a little while to get up to speed, but it worked. And, and then also from a safety perspective, curbside delivery. In New Orleans, I heard a story about how the shop was actually on the 2nd floor, and they had one of these dumb waiter things that they would lower.
I think it was in Oxford, right? I've been to that store. Yeah.
My son
picture
went
it happening.
Yeah, my son went to the University of Mississippi, and when I visited him, I didn't know about that store. I did visit. I think it was called Death of World Music. It was a great record store.
Yeah. So what's next for record store days? Are there other big structural plans, or are they just going to keep expanding?
Well,
the drop format.
They make it up as they go along. But getting back to what you were saying about, there were some people who always, have complaints about record store day. Those are preconceived notions, and I mean, one of the aims of the book was to dispel that. Record store day doesn't profit off of these records. They're a collective, it's much like Word Up, nonprofit type of thing. It's and it's also not a ruse by the major labels. The funny thing about Warner was the only major label that understood record store day right from the start. Sony and Universal were sitting on the sidelines, and they were kind of skeptical.
Yeah.
And then they realized, well, this is really real. And I just want to read this one little paragraph here. So Michael Kurtz is the sort of face of Record Store Day, and he had a meeting with the Warner head named Grover Beery. And they were already doing a Neil Young's greatest hits record at that point. So Michael says, I talked about that 2007 Baltimore meeting where they greenlit it. So that was called Noise in the Basement. So Michael's saying, I came out of that Noise in the Basement meeting with Eric's voice in my head. Hey, let's try to get vinyl. So I meet with Grover, and he asks, hey, how can we do this thing called Record Store Day and press vinyl? And he says, I'm thinking of doing the same thing. This is perfect. Let's marry the two of them together. This, in hindsight, it wasn't like we knew what we were doing. We were just spitballing, and then it became a real thing. So Kurtz, looking back on that meeting more than 14 years later, says to me, he wondered at the time whether Grover might have been high because the label exec appeared a little too enthusiastic about his vision for Record Store Day. And then Grover says, I don't have any idea of whether he was under the influence that day. I don't think that was the case, to tell you the truth, and it would have been abnormal for me, but anything's possible. And then he has an anecdote. He says, the last time I saw Kurtz, we had breakfast, and he gave me an edible. So he gave me an edible when we were in Berlin, actually for Making Vinyl in 2019, and Michael gave me an edible there too. So,
right on. Cool. Any other questions from the audience? Thoughts, concerns? Cool. Well, thanks so much, Larry. This has been a very organic process from this room being piles and piles of these wooden wine crates filled with books to more like a store, more like a store. And Larry's been with us since the very beginning. So I just want to thank Larry Jaffee for joining us.
Thank you to Veronica for having me here for this. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. So it's 10 after 5. We're open till 6. Larry will hang out. He can sign books. He can answer more questions.